Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to kick off our meeting. All right, so we'll start off with our roll call. Nicole? All right. Jim Langus? Here. Ethel McNeil?
Here.
Chris Gray?
Present.
Ben Young?
Present.
John Monroe?
Present.
Julius Wilson?
Present.
Kari Kwas?
Here.
And Mary Fossey?
Here.
Just saying everyone's names, it's just like, I know
Moen
everyone's
Parver.
names. Oh, I'm here. Alrighty, so I move to approve our minutes as they are. Oh, okay. Did we email them?
No, it's just getting through the minutes of our last meeting with all the Q&A and things like that was a bit more time consuming, so I focused on the scope of work instead, but I'll have it for you guys for your January meeting.
So we'll do those for the next one, and then next part, staff comments.
I just want to add that I added voting process to the agenda. John actually brought that up at the last meeting and it didn't make the agenda, so I added it. So this agenda is different than the one that you received in your inbox. And then also during discussion items, I just want to briefly talk about the budget for Tony and kind of where we're at with that conversation, just to kind of provide an update. It's a rough update because we're very beginning stages of it, but I think it's a good time to do that.
Perfect. Alrighty, so we'll move on to item number 1, districting master scope of work, final review. So we have that as a first attachment to our packets. So if everyone's had a chance to review it. Oh, John, go ahead.
Yes, before we move on to that, I have a point of order that I'd like to discuss.
Okay.
I would ask for a point of order, as I believe we may be in violation of the City of Everett Purchasing Guidelines, Section 11.2, Fairness to Vendor Rules. I would ask for you to bear with me for a few minutes. In mid-October, RFPs were sent out to those that we were aware of for the position of districting master. To support that request and for interviews to follow, the Districting Commission was asked to submit any questions that they might have for the districting master. I do not know how many questions in total were submitted by Commission members. On October 31st, in preparation for the November 4th Commission meeting, Nicole sent the Commission resumes from TJ Wapima and Tony Fairfax. In a second email on October 31st, Nicole also forwarded a third package from a Bob Schweitzer of Sammamish Data Systems. That package included copies of work Bob had done for the Port of Everett. Bob agreed to join the November 18th Commission meeting. On August the 4th, just prior to the Commission meeting, Nicole forwarded the written responses to the 11 questions from Tony. On the November 4th meeting, TJ appeared before the Commission and answered the 11 questions in person. He did not submit a written response to the questions, and as TJ spoke with quite an accent, it sometimes was difficult to understand him. As such, with one well-written and thought-out response to the 11 questions from Tony and one verbal response to the 11 questions from TJ, it was very difficult to compare one candidate with another, so we decided not to. As such, we all agreed that Tony would need to appear in person via video conference at the November 18th Commission meeting. We also asked Nicole, using video from TJ's November 4th appearance, to transcribe his responses to the 11 questions, such that we would have written responses from both candidates. On November the 15th, Nicole provided Bob's responses to 28 questions. After reading through his responses, I was concerned about his response to one question in particular, that being, has any of your previous work ever been challenged in court, and if so, were you successful in that challenge? As Bob was the only one asked this question, and because of his honest answer, at least for me, that began to firm up my thoughts on him. Based on the response to the questions that the other candidates had not been asked, it unfortunately left me with a less than ideal opinion of Bob. At the November 18th commission meeting, Bob appeared in person and responded verbally to the 11 questions. Unfortunately, Tony was unable to see our commission meeting, but was able to hear Bob's responses to the 11 questions, which he acknowledged. And he was also able to listen to any of the follow-up questions, putting him, Tony, at an advantage over Bob. Tony then came into view and answered the 11 questions. Because Tony was able to hear the discussion we had with Bob, he was able to take advantage of that in his responses. I do not know where we go from here, but I believe we have at least 3 instances where at least 2 of our candidates were not treated fairly. Number 1, we had difficulty understanding TJ's verbal response to the 11 questions. Then comparing what we had remembered of TJ's response to the written response of Tony's, it just didn't feel right. Disadvantage TJ. Number 2, Bob was given 28 questions to respond to, and I read all 28 responses, with TJ and Tony only given 11 to respond to. The 17 additional questions Bob answered delves more deeply into his operations than that of the others. Disadvantage Bob. Number 3, Tony was able to listen to all of Bob's responses and then incorporate those as lessons learned when he made his own response. Advantage Tony. My summary. This is not about having Tony, Bob, or TJ sue us for bias or discrimination or not being in compliance with the city's fairness of vendor rules. It is about having a fair, level playing field and total transparency where we decide who will help us with this most difficult task that we have ahead of us. In closing, I do not know about you, but I am not comfortable either with our selection process or of moving ahead with our final candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm guessing we probably gonna need to ask questions of.
Yeah, I want to clarify. Thank you so much, John, for the well thought out, for preparing that before you came in. I feel like that was very graceful, very nice. Thank you. So just as we think about this, so TJ would have been our first candidate that we interviewed, so Bob could have watched that on TV as well as all of our meetings are broadcasted, or you could watch them on the website, whatever suits you. And as far as the 28 questions, I do want to address that. So I did call and apologize for that mix-up to all of you individually, because I had sent my original document to him when I collected your 28 questions. So what we did was we put those in his packet of information. This is just for everyone at home so they can understand what we did, or what I did. I put those in his packet of responses since he didn't actually submit a written, he didn't answer any of the questions on the RFP. And so I submitted that as additional information, whereas both TJ and Tony had given more information on their previous work. So I think our purchasing department did not have any issues with our process or how we did it, as we didn't even have to go to bid. We chose to do that because we were having trouble, so we actually extended our reach much further than we would have had I done it by myself. And because you're an independent commission, your rules are slightly different than that if we were going to go out to pave a street or build a sidewalk or something like that. It's a bit different. And then that's all I have to say, and so I think I'll leave you guys to discuss, and Flora can come up and provide any additional feedback that she would like to as well.
Sure. Hi, Flora Diaz from the legal department. And purchasing did review this process as we went through it, but I'm sure legal can provide another review now that we have your comments on the record here. I'm not sure if the response would be a legal memorandum or if it would be an executive session issue, but we'll certainly review it and respond.
Thank you, Flora.
And as a side note, oh wow, mine's really loud today. As a side note, Nicole did call me and we discussed this before she made the calls to everyone else. And just with the time crunch we were under and the fact that TJ had not submitted anything in his RFP, we felt that it just made the most sense just to make that his RFP response and then keep the 11 questions that we agreed upon that legal had approved in each of our packets so that we could line those questions up and everyone could see each person's response to those. And then, like she said, put the other additional stuff as just additional information that he's providing. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts they'd like to share?
I stand by my comments, and as this is on video, they are documented in public forum. Thank you.
I would comment. I raised some concerns at the last meeting. I said our process was awfully short, 45 minutes. And I questioned how some of us could draw conclusions that some of you made about certain individuals, like one would work better with the other than the public, another said travel was a problem, and we seemed to wander quite a bit that night, as you'll recall. We were talking, some of you spoke of, was it TJ? Is that the right initials? TJ, and thought he might be the good choice. There was some discussion about hiring both TJ and Tony, and I think at that point I said, yeah, that didn't seem to work. That tag team didn't make a lot of sense, and then we ended up with Tony, and so I personally, I don't know about the rest of you, but I have been comfortable because I just don't know. In fact, I had even suggested that one option was to turn it back to the city council. You may recall, and let the city council and the attorney's office work together to bring to select the districting master and hand that, ask that individual to work with our committee. So I can just tell you that I wasn't really. I think we could have done a better job with our due diligence on that entire process, and I think as I recall, I recall when we voted that it was one that didn't vote for the party that that the majority did. It doesn't mean I'm not going to give my best effort to work with anybody once we get them on board, but I wasn't, part of that vote was just based on the process that we went through. So.
Thank you. Anyone else with any thoughts or concerns they'd like to share on this matter?
I guess I do want to chime in. John's comments were, I thought were pretty thorough and point well taken. I also heard Jim at the previous meeting, and through both of those discussions, I felt that because this body, this commission, had ample opportunity, or as no one at this commission had any more opportunity to view or discuss than the other, it was not at a disadvantage. It may have been the candidate's disadvantage, but this body had very much an equal conversation around that, and so therefore I personally felt that it was a fair process. While when you're making judgments, I know that I generally make a snap judgment within a minute or two of meeting a person, and that's just me. That doesn't mean that everybody is going to do it. It just means that that's how I view people. within a minute or two of meeting them. And sometimes I actually change my opinion, but generally speaking, about 90% of the time I'm right and I go with it. And I'm not saying that others should do the same. What I am saying, though, is that I felt that all of the candidates had an opportunity to express themselves. There may have been some slight advantage of Tony in his responses, but at the same time, I think that I can't remember the gentleman's name, the third gentleman's name, Bob, he had more of an opportunity because he was able, if he had wanted, he was definitely able to hear some of the, what was said about TJ. And his answers, as well as Tony's answers in the previous meeting, because we talked about his written answers. We didn't hear from him until the second meeting, but I just feel that it was as far as I'm concerned, that it was a fair process and that we should move on unless at the next meeting that legal comes back and says, hey, this process is interrupted. I feel that we should move forward.
Can we get a point of clarification from legal? So if this process is deemed unfair, does that mean we did not meet the 90-day deadline and this will move over to council's decision of who the districting master will be?
So because the 90-day deadline is part of the charter, I don't think that we could go backwards and decide that we actually complied. We're past 90 days now, so
What she said was that since we're already past the 90 days, any decision that we have to make moving forward, if there is anything that we have to redo, that decision will be made by the city council. All right, does anyone else have any other comments?
I'd like to say, we've been through this thing and we've raised a lot of questions like we did at the last meeting. And I think a lot of us were not totally on board as the way it took place, but it did take place. To turn this thing back over to the Everett City Council says that we are less than humans at doing a job that they've asked us to do. I think we need to stand on our feet and we need to take that stand strongly and say we can do this and we're going to do this and we're going to think about the city of Everett. Get your personal feelings and all that stuff out of everything. Let's be fair so we make a decision that will affect the city of Everett to where we all can be happy and content with it. We need to start working together and we need to drop a lot of the outside deals. If you've got outside interests of anybody telling you pull this way, pull that way, let's stop that. Let's come together and work together right now. Here we are. I admire what John has done, and I remember John when I worked with John years ago, and he was always like that, and stuff like that, to make sure every little thing was taken care of, every T was crossed and every I was dotted. That's just the way he operates, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we've been chosen to do a job, and if we can't do it, then you know what? Shame on us.
Thank you, Ethel. Does anyone else have any other comments?
I actually would just like to say that I personally feel very confident in the process. I did make an honest mistake, but everything that I did was completely transparent and in communication with this body the entire time. And so if there is an issue, then that's okay. We can fix it. But I just absolutely feel 100% confident in the work that I did to produce the best candidates possible. So thank you.
I'll just echo that. I think we had some hiccups along the way, but nothing that makes me feel uncomfortable with the choices that we made or our process. I think we felt like we had 3 great candidates. We probably couldn't make a bad decision. I think we made some great points. As far as I'm concerned, if legal and purchasing is happy with what we've done, I think we saw written responses from everyone. We had an opportunity to see them face to face, and I feel pretty good about it, so.
Thank you, Chris. All right, I think we are ready to move back on to item 1, the scope of work final review. We all received that via email, and we all have printed copies of it. If everyone's already had a chance to take a look at it, if anyone has any initial thoughts they'd like to share.
Can I get a clarification? So we're not actually going to be reviewing a contract? This is,
So this scope of work will go into an already created standard City of Everett contract. And so that is, the agreement to work with the city, meet deadlines, et cetera. This is the piece that we actually can control the work that they're doing. I can provide that contract if you're interested. I'm happy to email that out, but it is our standard contract that we typically do not edit for any reason. And this has been reviewed by our planning department and our legal department. So any changes and it's also been reviewed by Mr. Fairfax. He submitted some comments to try to fill it up and better explain what his work was going to be. So just for your clarification of who has looked this over.
What is Maptitude? Is that software that is used in this process? Do we know?
I will Google it.
I did see one thing that I thought would be good if we added. So when he sends over draft maps, I think for our own understanding, it would be great if he included, I know he mentioned a narrative, but a narrative that explains like why he made certain decisions. I think it would help too with any people that are looking at it outside of our commission, but just like more of an explanation at like key points. So not every single choice he makes, I wanted an explanation for, and if he makes any like key decisions that we know why he made them. So that way, if there are changes we want to make, we can kind of look at particular things and say, hey, why did we do this? Can we do this differently?
Can you tell me what bullet that's under, Simone, so I can make that note?
Under draft maps and written descriptions, it could go with like bullet 4. Or even bullet 1. Or it could be its own bullet. And then it would also probably go with the final too.
And Maptitude is GIS mapping software. Maptitude GIS and mapping software is what the title is. A mapping software program created by CalPER Corporation that allows users to view, edit, and integrate maps.
Thank you.
Bullet 2 is that blank there for meetings, something that we needed to discuss and determine at this meeting.
I have in my notes separate from this. When I had emailed this, we had talked about 12 meetings, and you guys had talked about having them present at those meetings. And then I wasn't clear: does that, when we talk about that number, whatever number of meeting that is, does that also include the community meetings, or are we separating those things out? So by definition, district commission meetings and community meetings, are those separate or are those the same? And so that would change that bullet to be X amount of commission meetings and X amount of community meetings.
I think they're separate. Community meetings is very specific to the community, and to me, that's the 6 plus if we decide to do more. And district commission meetings is when we're here in this room.
I would agree. I just felt you guys should clarify that.
And I think it looks like the language mentions on-site, so obviously those well, not obviously, I think we discussed the potential for having video even at the community meetings, but we might want to distinguish that. I don't think these meetings with us would be in person, but.
We also discussed pinching those community meetings together, so potentially having, 6 in 2 days or 3 in 2 days, and breaking those up. And so, in my cost analysis that I'm working on, that's something that I am looking at. So that would be helpful as well if I could get a better understanding from this group of how they're feeling to have, a couple on a weekend, as many as we can get on a weekend, to reduce that his time traveling, and then to reduce that travel cost. So if we could get a kind of a feel for how you guys are, if you're okay with that.
I myself would prefer a couple on weekends for brevity's sake, because my schedule gets pretty full and I'm just volunteering.
I think we should talk to him, maybe figure out what his schedule's like, so I don't like to hear no when I put thought into something, and then somebody says no, I put a week thought into something. So if we'd be able to talk to him, see what his schedule's like, upcoming, softball games or anything like that, and what days he'd like to give us flying out, because he's on a journey to get here. It's not like down the street or nothing. So I think we could do that. I think we should do that first.
On that note, I somewhat disagree. I definitely disagree, because we're going to pay all expenses, so should be able to meet our timetable. He went into it with the understanding that we had a definitive timetable, and so he should, that is, in my guesstimate, should be understood by by Tony, that he's going to have to work with our timetable, not his timetable.
My concern would be with what would have the best turnout and best community participation. So if on the weekend events would do that, then definitely we should be having most of them on the weekends.
And I can talk to our neighborhood development office and just ask them, like, what are the best days? And maybe they say like Thursday, Friday, Sunday, in which case maybe we can talk to Tony and have a set on Thursday, a set on Friday, and a set on Sunday, or whatever they recommend. And I can bring that back to us once we're ready to start that planning process with him. And so I think we probably have a lot of people that could provide professional insight or practice insight on when the best times to have community meetings are.
So for purpose of this, do we just want to kind of throw a number out there, shoot a little high, and we don't have to have all those meetings? Is that a good approach?
I'd say we should have like all six of the community meetings. I think for the purpose of the contract, we should say that he should be present here. He should be physically at the meetings. And then as we get closer to then, if we decide, hey, you know what, he doesn't need to be all at 6, we can back off of it a little bit. But I would rather have the contract be a little bit more than what we need than have to later on try and renegotiate it. And then as for other meetings, just thinking if we meet once a month, we should just figure out how many, like between now and the end, how many meetings we would have, and just put it in there potentially for him to be at all of our meetings moving forward. And more than likely he won't physically need to be here, but at least then we have it in there that that's our expectation, and we can always back down from it if we need to.
So up to 12, or do we want to like say up to 15 so that we have that if we have 2 a month or something like that? So because we can say up to 15 commission meetings, and then do we want to say up to 7 community meetings? So we have to have 6, but then that also gives an opportunity for an additional, and then also with that 15, it would give opportunity to have him come out to a city council meeting if necessary. Once it was time to present the final map, having him attend for that might be something to think about as well.
I think 15 sounds like a good number to have in there. It seems like it's probably more than we'll need him here for, but I'd rather have more than less.
Do we get the sense that requesting him to be out here for 15 meetings will be a showstopper.
Like for him, do I think that
Well, you
he's
gotta
gonna
remember,
back
I mean,
out?
It isn't a 1 hour drive, 2 hour drive from Woodinville. It's, you know, a 3 day activity each time he comes out here. It's a day out here. It's a full day to get out here. And then he's here a day and then a full day to go back. So if you
I-
take 3 times 15, that's 45 days.
I think that just being that we're all adults and we're all here to kind of accomplish the same thing, my goal isn't to waste his time and my goal is not to waste money. So if it's not necessary for him to be here, then he won't be out here. But as I said, I'd rather have more on the contract and back out, or we can, you know, like Nicole mentioned, put a few in the same weekend. And like I said, I'd rather have more on there than less.
So I understand that, but what we're asking him to do is to commit to 45 days with 15 visits to 3 days, 3 days of visit. And yeah, maybe we don't need it all, but he still has to commit to that as part of this contract.
If I could chime in, I thought that many of these meetings, like the meetings that we would have, that if he would be here, it wouldn't be physically here. He would be in Zoom or Skype, I think is what you use here. That we would use that as, because it's a conversation, not necessarily a physical presence, because it's not interacting with the community. But on those meetings that we would have, so we would only be talking about the community meetings and the and the possible meeting with the county council, which would, I mean, city council, the meeting with the city council, which would be about 7 meetings, and hopefully all three of them could, the 6 meetings could happen within a week's time. So it would actually be a 4-day period of time plus another 3-day period of time that he would have to physically be here. The rest of the time should be able to do it through electronic.
It's a not to exceed, and you can check his temperature when you visit with him. And most likely, you see what his temperature is on the meeting, and most likely, it's not going to be, as Simone said, that many meetings, but at least you have the ability to have them out, so.
And I can either take out that word on-site and or change the district commission meeting to community meetings and make that specific to the community meetings that we're going to have versus what we specified earlier, the commission meetings versus the community meetings. So if we take out that word on-site, because virtually, we just discovered we have a different way to do the teleconference. It's much better, and so there might actually be a ability to interact with him on mapping software and see his desktop from where we're sitting. So that would also be helpful to know.
Both of those options work, whether he's here, whether it's electronic. I agree with John's point, 45 days, if you look at it that way, too many, but I don't know that that's what we're talking about.
Also, when we talk about the community meetings, I don't want us to get into this thing where we're gonna meet with each separate community. We can combine that. You know, we don't have to say Delta community, Cascade, all that kind of stuff. We need to combine the neighborhoods and stuff to make this thing efficient. And so we can get a big enough conference room to put more than one neighborhood together.
So when we're talking about the community meetings, we're talking about in the proposed districts. So we can't combine them. There has to be one in each of the proposed district and then one at large. So that's what we're required to do.
It's not tied to the neighborhoods in that case. It might be mixed. So I was looking at his price proposal, and he indicates himself the cost per community forum or meeting. So on-site community forum or district commission meeting, $1,900 plus $800 for one full travel day, to and from plus expenses. 2 is the community forum or district commission meeting via teleconference, $325 an hour. And then 3 was on-site, off-site work days, and meeting preparations are billed at $200 an hour. So in my mind, from the money standpoint, I would think that our meetings here, if it can be dialed in on a screen share, what have you, and he could be showing his screen as we're going through the maps, I'm perfectly content for those to be teleconference. And then we do try and consolidate those community forum days into a weekend or what have you, so that way we are maximizing his in presence, truly here in physical form, time to those as opposed to us talking to him on the screen. Because I think we're all used to that in our jobs, to talk to someone on a screen every once in a while.
And a very estimated, not real, well, it's a real number, but a very estimated number that I have right now after, marketing material, legal fees from Mr. Safarli, and travel and lodging for what what was proposed in his response back to our bid. We're about at $45,000, and just for his services, not including a contingency or publishing costs, marketing material, legal fees, or travel and lodging, we're looking at about $19,700. I know that's a little specific, but I've been working on this most of the day. I just don't have I need to go back through his documents, make sure I didn't miss anything, double check my numbers, and have finance review it. And then I'll bring it back to you guys once I know that there's no mathematical errors.
Those numbers are within our budget, though.
So that's the amount, with everything included, when this is over, that will be paid to him?
Hopefully. I mean, we're looking for just his cost in his contract without travel and lodging, $20,000. So that would just be his fee. And then hopefully when this is said and done, we'll be right around the $50,000 mark. If we stay on track of how we've done this year, but that's a hard one to pin down because we don't know. We've never done this before, so I can't really predict what there is to come. I can only look at what other communities have done and what it has cost them and try to run those numbers the best that I can to provide some type of pathway to, make financial sense. That's all I can do.
Can I move on to another thing? Or are we still at the up to whatever number of meetings? Okay. He had suggested in his paperwork and feedback about online solicitation of feedback and comments from the public. Is that included in here anywhere?
Well, there's the online mapping piece to provide ArcGIS online web mapping applications. And that would be dependent on what our website could do too. So he's willing to provide it. Can we, as a city, support it? I don't know. I think we can. It sounded at the last meeting like David Stahlheim felt we could support most of these things. And he also reviewed this and didn't say, hey, Nicole, I noticed the online mapping system. We can't support that. So we need to look a little bit more into that. But not having him do something within the scope is better than asking him to do something that is not within the scope, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Mary raises a good point. Can we ask that your office manages all of the communications between the public and the commission with Tony directly rather than have folks in general writing him back and forth and having us contact? Can we
Absolutely.
You be the gatekeeper for all of the communication.
Yeah, and we can put it into probably much more usable, Excel sheets and recurring or they can pull data straight from the website. I'm sure that our planning department will be able to do that. Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Short answer, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that he would be willing to provide input and consultation on just like the right questions to ask and the information that is needed in that process if we decide to do that.
Absolutely. And his first line, provide ongoing consultation and advice via telephone, email, online conference, or face-to-face meeting. I think that's a very broad statement that says, I will give you all the advice and recommendations that you need to be successful. Yeah, and 1.5, as Chris just pointed out as well.
I have one comment, Nicole. At the appropriate place in the scope of work, which may be under the first bullet, we should ask legal to insert language that makes it clear that there is a state law, the RCW, that identifies guidelines applicable to developing any redistricting plan. And these can be found in that March 2nd, 2018 memo from the city attorney regarding what he referred to as the rules of the road for city council districts. So I believe we should insert in here, there's a certain state law, that guidelines that may need to be followed.
That's absolutely easy to add. And the attorney's office, I know, would be happy to help me put that in there. So no problem.
So I still have one I'm not quite clear on. So we go through this whole process, he drafts some maps with written descriptions, and the 9 of us are all happy with it. And we say this is ready to go out for the 6 community meetings. And so we take it out to the 6 community meetings, and it doesn't go well. And so it not only doesn't go well and they don't like the lines, but they come back with 21 questions for each group. Is he responsible for answering those questions? Or is the commission responsible for answering those questions? Or is the city responsible for answering those questions? Because I don't see it in his scope of work.
Depending on the question, I think we would have to look at them and decide if it was a legal question, if it was a mapping software question, if it was an opinion question on why the commission chose to do something. And then we would answer those accordingly. I think the city would manage who is appropriate to answer what question. And then we would report that back to you, like, was this RCW followed, at point 7, legal could answer that question, and I could mark in there legal answered and provide that back to you as far as process goes. But he would be at these meetings answering the questions and also teaching staff or collecting data himself. So if he wanted me to be at the community meetings and pass out paper and pick them up and put them into something that he could use, I totally will do that for him. Depending on how you guys decide you want to collect neighborhood feedback and how he recommends we should collect neighborhood feedback. So that's kind of a circle, but yes.
So the bullet says, work with the districting commission to obtain information obtained from community organizations and the general public. That's really clear that he would work with us to obtain that information. Now he has the information, what's he going to do with it? I'm more concerned about who's going to answer the questions, not who's going to collect the questions.
So our legal department, our planning department, the districting master, or whoever the expert is on whatever the question is will be the person who will answer it. We have experts in, if it's a question on neighborhoods, it will be our neighborhood department answering that question. If it's a question on streetscapes or sidewalks or neighborhood lines or anything like that, the department at the city that is an expert on those things will be answering those questions and providing that input to Mr. Fairfax or Tony. Well, once he has the information about the city of Everett and our neighborhoods and our landmarks, or not our landmarks, but our natural divides and our school districts, et cetera. He'll take that information and create maps that he thinks make sense, and then it will be up to this body to say, that doesn't make sense, these neighborhoods don't belong together, that's not a line, can you explain why this line is, slightly to the right, or whatever that might be. And then he will answer those questions about the map. The city will answer the questions about the city. You and the city together will answer questions about the community. And then he will take that information, create the maps, and answer questions about the maps and why he drew those lines.
My final comment, it's always my final comment. I was involved on the periphery with the handling of the questions to the FAA on the permitting of Payne Field. And believe me, we needed to be much more clear as to who was going to respond to the questions, because it became a real burden on trying to decide who was going to respond and get them to accept that responsibility to. And I recognize this isn't quite as big of a deal, but it ended up costing significantly more money on everybody's part and taking a lot more time, because we argued about, well, I'm not going to answer that question, it's your question.
So are you talking specifically during the meetings?
As a result of the meetings.
Okay.
So it was the same kind of thing, we had to do community meetings.
I feel that in those type of moments, there's gonna be more action than words. So whoever takes the part, we say we're a team effort. We say we're trying to get the same thing done. If you want me to answer all the questions, feed me the information, the right information, I will answer all the questions happily. I speak for my community.
We're contracting with an outside individual, a district master, who has expertise and is going to look at, and he mentioned that there are some federal guidelines that go back a few years, and now we have our own RCW in the state of Washington that has certain guidelines. He's going to, his responsibility to follow those guidelines and present us with plans. And then I hope that there aren't individual biases, of which I've heard some already over the last couple of months in terms of thoughts. I hope there aren't any biases in terms of once we get those plans, because they should be based on those guidelines. And if we meet with have those public meetings, if there are questions about why certain things were included or not included, or certain boundaries, I believe that's a party that needs to explain. That's a party that needs to explain first why the plans were drafted the way they were drafted, and let him defend his work. And if we revise that work for some reason, then that may be the time when someone may say, Simone, that we did revise plan number 3 because we felt that there were some other considerations. But up until that point, I believe the district master has to do the heavy lifting and has to do the communication with the public.
He also says that he's gonna, work with the commission to interface with the planning department staff to provide relevant data. He talks about interfacing with the community. I feel like this draft, except for, including the RCW, being specific about the meetings, provided, around the explanation of the map that Simone brought up earlier, and then putting something in about answering questions and being held accountable for that. I'll ask our planning and legal department and Tony and just kind of figure out how do we put that in there so it's clear. Is there any other things in here that you guys felt were really missing? I felt like we had taken everything from the last meetings that we've had, big points that you've talking about, things that were very important to you and created this scope of work based on that. And if I'm off basis, I need to know that, so that we can come up with a scope of work you're all happy with today.
We should talk about it here rather than just leave it open and then try and figure it out later. There's a bullet down, the last point under the first bullet, work with the district and commission to obtain information obtained from community organizations and the general public. I'm not sure what that means. I had thought that we were going to, I don't know if, what does that mean? What is required of us?
So hypothetically, understanding that Cocoon House, on Colby, how many units are in it? What kind of community does that support? Does that need to be near Sequoia High School? What does that mean to us as a community? How do we, feel about that organization? What things are around? Like, do we want to get nonprofit input? Do we want to get, well, obviously we have government input. Boeing, do we want Boeing to provide input they're in Everett? Like, who do we want to provide input?
How's that going to be done?
We talked a lot about social engagement on this commission, a lot of understanding what the community wants and understanding Everett. And so he will recommend how we do that, how we reach out to those community organizations. We'll talk to him about what we think. These are huge ones. These are our nonprofits, etc. And he'll make a recommendation to you on how or what input we should be soliciting from them. The Downtown Business Association, things like that.
I think what we're saying is everything you think the community is going to be asking, we ourselves are going to be asking. Before we take this to the community out there, we would have gone over everything that he is going to submit to us. We are going to have those same questions. He's going to have to answer them for us so that we're prepared when we present this to the public and stuff. It's not going to go out there where he's going to take it out there to them and we're all sitting there hearing it for the first time. We are going to hear it for the first time. We're going to go over it with a fine-tooth comb, and we're going to look at every little thing, ask every little question that we're asking right here, and he's going to have to answer that we think the public might ask. So that when we put it out there, we're going to avoid a lot of questions that they might have because we would have asked them ourselves and gotten the answers for them.
Well, to save time and be efficient, and save us from, to save time, it may be that you should have just one scoping meeting. On large projects, often they have a scoping meeting at the front end, and they invite the public to come as a whole and share whatever comments they have. We had spoken of this 2 months ago about having a meeting to hear what the public had to say. Maybe we should perhaps we should schedule. Just a suggestion. I'm looking around the table. I'm trying to find something that makes it more efficient for us, rather than just leaving this wide open and wondering how people are going to input. Now you're saying, Nicole, maybe we let him decide that, and you may want to propose the idea of one large scoping meeting. Advertise it in the paper, let the community come, let him talk about his process, and let them share whatever their observations.
Go ahead, Ben, sorry.
From my perspective, I would not be in favor of a large scoping meeting because if you put something out there, what you're doing is giving a blank sheet of paper, putting a blank sheet of paper out there and saying, okay, tell me what all your concerns are before there are any real concerns. I think that there should be proposed prior to having that go forward before you take it to the community, because you have to at least establish some parameters. If you don't establish some parameters, then I just believe that having a large scoping meeting with the community is not the way to go for us. We should start by first having some parameters around there and have at least a proposed plan, not the final, but a proposed plan to present to the community, and then let the community fine tune it.
Ben, I agree with you. I'm going to hold you to that, because early on in one of our first discussions, I had suggested that we do follow a path like that later than sooner, rather than have a number of public meetings up front. So I'm going to hold you to that idea, and I support, if that's a motion, I'll second it. Once we get further along and get a plan developed, then we can have a meeting.
I'm going to interject
Sucker
here.
punched me.
I really appreciate all of the foresight that this commission has. I think that that's a really special thing that's going to be come in handy as we move through this process. But we really need to focus on the scope of work and what is in here. And that, if we want to have a scoping meeting, that already exists in here because he's agreeing to come to community meetings. So I just really, I need you guys to approve this or not approve this with edits so that we can get a contract with him after our legal review of our process, so that come January, we're ready to move forward. We have someone hired who can start attending our meetings, and we can get professional feedback on these wonderful ideas that all of you have and how he has seen these play out in other communities, because he is the expert.
Can I add another potential edit? Is there anything in here that would require him to obtain final approval on the work that he did from the commission?
You get final approval. It's in our charter.
Yes, we do get final approval, but there's nothing in here requiring him to get that from us, right? On the work that he does.
I guess I'm confused as the question, because he's submitting it to us, so the city can't use it unless you've approved it. So those already exist on our end. I think I'm confused what you're asking.
We could include complying with the charter in addition to complying with the RCW, and just reference the City of Everett charter in the same spot where we're referencing specific RCW to include that.
Thank you, Flora. Sure. Sorry, Mary, I still don't understand what you asked.
In full trust of Nicole, I would move that we accept the scope of work as presented and as marked up by Nicole. I would propose we accept that as a motion.
I second the motion.
All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, perfect. And so moving on to item number 2, the voting process. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, my thought on the voting process, when the first meeting that we had a discussion about whether or not we were going to go with full consensus, which meant that all 9 of us needed to agree, or we were going to go with simple majority, and we agreed to go with simple majority. I believe we are at the point where we not only need to continue to go with simple majority, I believe we need to document the specific votes of each individual person. We are responsible and accountable as a team, but we are all responsible and accountable as individuals. And I have nothing to hide with saying yes or no, and would prefer that my vote be acknowledged as a yes or no or abstention, rather than just as well, I went along with the tide. So that's my point. I would just like to add that we document the yays, nays, and abstentions and who voted which way.
I can definitely agree with that.
Okay, all those in favor of amending or does anyone else have any other comments on it? Okay, go ahead.
Can Simone and Nicole and Chris go back and either listen to the minutes or the tape or amend it going back to our first meeting and include, amend, however we want to amend those minutes to include the votes that we've taken previously, to go back to the start? Because I also don't mind having my votes, I'm real comfortable whether I vote yea or nay on any issue, so.
It's all about transparency.
At this point, I don't see a need for it, but if that's the way the body wants, I would say from this moment forward that we have a physical yay or nay, but that's just me.
Just, these are all live, so people can see how you vote, and then also on the website, the videos are live. I can go back and amend, and you can approve minutes if you guys want to do that. That's up to you, but just for clarification, you can watch them if you choose to.
Does anyone else have any other further comments?
Does this apply to feeler votes? Because I feel like that's just a time.
Those are different.
Okay.
Field votes are in here as, the commission may ask for a field vote. If there's a majority, the chair will allow for those in disagreement an opportunity to speak. If it sparks more discussion, great. If not, then you'll move on to a vote, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so all those in favor of, so first let's vote on if we want to, from here on out, start to tally individual votes. And then after that, we can do a second vote on if we want to go back to the beginning and tally all of those votes. I think that's the way it makes the most sense. So all those in favor of, from now on, I guess, recording individual votes instead of doing the group yay or nay, please raise your hand. All those opposed?
Going back?
So this is from now on, and moving forward. So all those opposed, are you opposed?
I'd like to go back, I'm not sure.
We're doing two votes.
Okay.
Can you, and it's, someone makes a motion and then so just start over, make a motion. I don't think everybody heard you, and be clear, and then try again.
Okay,
I-
so, go ahead.
I move that we, from this point forward, do a physical vote by name.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstain, I'm abstaining, I don't care one way or the other. Okay, so the yeas have it, and so for our second motion, oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there an option just to go back and tally our last meeting, where our meeting where we actually voted on the amending the minutes for where we voted on the districting master, and not worrying about the other ones, because I think it's already publicly recorded.
You can make that motion if you'd like.
Because I think it's, yeah, just to where like the really pertinent votes are.
Back to when we started the real meeting. Two meetings.
Yeah? Okay. I move that we just do the backdating tally of the notes for the last two meetings.
I would move that we go back to the November 4th meeting. That was the first meeting where we really began in earnest to discuss the districting master and tally the votes by name, a type of vote, starting at that meeting. That's my
Second.
move.
I second that motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Wait a minute.
Oh, start,
Because we just-
oh, yeah, yep.
Hold on.
I have the question, after we vote on this, can there be another motion that says, let's go back to the first meeting?
Well,
If you'd like.
That's-
Or we could,
If there's a second, there's a second. If there's not, there's not. But if not, because it's not that I want to vote against your November 4th, but I'd like to go back to the, if we're going to do this, let's go back to the first meeting that we had and have all of our votes tallied on the decisions that we made. I don't know why we just pick a date, November 4th or some date.
Question for you. What is the purpose you want to go that far back?
I would just like votes recorded in our minutes to make the record of how the positions that we took. Now, Nicole's correct. People, if they're interested, they can get the information off of the television, a request for public information, any of that. But I don't mind my positions on different matters being part of the record.
If I can just comment on time, so that's over 6 hours of watching these back again, which I can do. If you vote to do that, then I will do it with a big smile on my face. That's great. But just for your guys' knowledge, that is over 6 hours of work to go back and tally your votes.
Well, let's do this, Nicole. I don't want to make it more cumbersome for the group this evening. We have a motion on the floor for November 4. Let's vote on that motion.
Okay, now we have to do it individually, okay.
So I'll just, if you guys are comfortable, I'll just read the names and you can say yay, nay, or abstain. So Simone Tarver,
Yay.
Jimmy Langus, Ethel McNeil,
Yes.
Chris Garai,
Yes.
Ben Young,
Yes.
John Monroe,
Yes.
Julius Wilson,
Abstain.
Kari Kwas,
Yes.
Mary Fossey.
Yes.
That's a majority. I will go back to the November 4th minutes and record your votes moving forward through tonight. And I haven't done the last meeting's minutes yet, so that's actually perfect.
And then we need to amend our basic rules of procedure to add that in there.
And I will do that as well. And then I'll just email you guys a new copy just so you have the current copy. And is there anywhere, I'll just put it kind of with motions. I'll just put it in with motions and then I'll just say that, staff or chair will take
The physical-
individual yay, nay, or abstain votes, or verbal votes, I guess, yay, nay, or abstained individual verbal votes. Okay.
And so I think the only other thing we have on our agenda, just noting that right now we have a tentative meeting for January 6th. So I think we'll plan to meet then.
Not tentative, I think that will be a for sure meeting, if that's okay with the group. And that way it keeps it a regular meeting and we can amend the agenda, but also we should be in a good place with Mr. Fairfax, and we can have him attend that meeting and make recommendations, or attend video and make recommendations on what we should do next steps. Also, he can, we could maybe figure out a time for him to fly out and attend maybe our March meeting in person, so that we all have the opportunity to get to know him a little bit better, as we'll be working with him for the next year. 1 full year.
Question for you, is any work going to be ongoing the rest of this month? Does he have any questions for us?
His questions is more just nailing down the scope of work and then agreeing on a cost, which everyone has seen what he charges an hour, a visit, all of those things. We've had those conversations. Once I finish this draft that I'm going to propose to him, I will email that out to you. Just please, you can't reply all. I'll blind copy you, so it should take that out of it, as I've been doing, just so you can keep track of where we're at in the process. And then once he agrees to that, I will just put it up on our website so that his contract and all of that is clear, and I'll send you a link to that.
So January 6th is our next meeting. Do we have one booked for after that?
No, we'll come up with our ongoing meeting schedule from there. I'm hoping to stick to Mondays. That seems to work really well. Works really well for this room, but I think that's a conversation you guys should revisit with your districting master as well.
Would it be at all possible to also select the February meeting? I have some personal time off after the February the 11th, and I certainly would like to be able to come prior to that.
I have no problem. Does anyone have an issue selecting our at least through February.
I would like that.
Maybe like February 3rd, the
Yeah.
first Monday of February?
That's the first Monday. That sticks with what we've kind of been doing. It seems to be working well with everyone. So February 3rd.
Great.
I move we adjourn.
Seconded. How about this will be the exception to our new rule? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, meeting's adjourned. I don't think we need to take a fiscal vote for that one.